Okay, I see the little dot pulsating, so it's recording. We begin as always with a little prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your divine love. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. So recapping a little bit, up until now, we have been looking at some basic principles of evolution. First, the fact of evolution as a process, okay, as a process, as a how. The fossil record, which is there, we cannot deny it. And from the fossil record, we see that many species have existed before, which are not around today, but they have similarities, morphological similarities. Of course, that's all we have is the actual structure, right? Pieces of bones, fossilized or imprints and so forth. And therefore, from the structure, we can assume the function. For example, if we see a fossil leg and the leg has a bend, has a knee, for example, well, it's safe to assume that there was an articulation there, that that leg was meant to move, right? Articulated in the middle somewhere where the bend was, and so forth. So we assume functions, and then from the functions, we can also expand out to certain behaviors. For example, if we see a campfire, another fire that has been contained with stones around it, then we can assume that that fire was made by someone that was used. And then we find maybe in the ashes of that fireplace, if we find remains of bones of other animals, it's fairly safe to assume that it was used for cooking, right? At some level and so forth. So that gets us to the behavior. So we can go from morphology to physiology, meaning the function, and then from physiology to the behavior of the overall organism. Okay. All right, so we have that. Then we have the strongest proof really of evolution is this issue of phylogenetics. Phylogenetics, in other words, the percentage homology between different species that starts pointing to relatedness, right? By percentage homology. And we can do the percentage homology either on the genotype or the phenotype. It's actually, which one, what's your intuition? Which one is easier to do? What's the first level of phenotype? The first level, remember, phenotype is the expression of the genotype. What's the first level of the phenotype? The first level of expression. The
DNA sequence.
Nucleotide, no, that's genotype, right? The nucleotides are the base pairs or the bases. That makes up the genotype itself, which is hidden. The genotype is inside the nucleus of the cell. But the phenotype is the expression. And the first level of expression, think molecularly, what do we have?
The DNA sequence.
Yeah, the protein sequence, the amino acid sequence of the protein. Because we know from the genetic code, right, that that protein sequence corresponds to a particular genotype, to the triplet base pairs, right? So ATG codes for, I'm gonna guess, phenylalanine. How many amino acids in nature? 20 naturally occurring amino acids, right? Remember Miller experiment? That's why it was so important, that experiment, because with that experiment, we can go from inorganic matter, inorganic elements, right? Like CO2, like ammonia, etc., to organic compounds, specifically amino acids, right? So the first level of expression of the genotype is the phenotype, is the protein sequence, all the thousands of proteins that we have in each cell. And why are proteins there? What do? They just hang around for fun? What do they do in the cell, the proteins?
They code for
They
amino
do?
acids.
They do the work. They do metabolism, right? Exactly. They do metabolism. For example, enzymes are proteins. Enzymes are involved in digestion and other processes in the body. And so another way of saying life organically is metabolism. If a cell is metabolizing, we can assume that that cell is alive, right? Because what happens with death, metabolism goes chaotic. There's disintegration, there's breaking down of all of the organic compounds in the cell. That's what we call rotting. When a cell rots, or when a tissue rots, an organ rots, is because chaos has set in. These proteins, these molecules are no longer working in pathways in an organized way. There's breaking down, there's catabolism going on, right? The breaking down of organic compounds into basic nutrients, which then go right into the ground. And that's why I say nature is economic. There's no waste in nature. No other animal produces garbage other than the human with artifacts. All right, so just kind of overall then, phylogenetics gives us these maps of percentage homology between species, between different species, and then we can rank them by percentage homology and little by little construct a whole tree, a tree of life, an evolutionary tree, whereby the individuals that have a higher percentage homology, then we can say that they diverged later in the evolutionary scale, all right? And organisms that have less homology, less percentage homology, they diverged earlier. The node is further back in evolutionary time, right? So for example, we have a higher percentage homology between the chimpanzee or with the fly. We have a higher percentage homology with the fly? With a chimpanzee.
Chimpanzee.
Yes, with a chimpanzee. And so we diverge from the fly much earlier. That was precisely the divergence between arthropods, flies being insects and insects being arthropods, right? The phylum Arthropoda, from the chordates, right? And so that occurred much earlier in evolution, millions of years before the divergence of primates, which is the divergence between the chimpanzee, the gorilla, the orangutan, and the human. We're going to look at that today precisely. So in other words, we have been looking at first the fact of evolution from the evidence that we see. Even though we don't observe the process itself, we observe the result. So we have to assume, we have to infer the process. And that process through four main forces that act on individuals: mutation, migration, drift, and selection. And it's actually, selection is the actual force that precipitates the event of speciation that gradually may lead to speciation by selecting out the less fit, all right? And so fitness can be traced all the way down to the genotype, but not all genes express. And when they do express, not all those genes achieve reproductive success. In other words, not every single individual in any population, in any society gets to reproduce, right? Including the human. And then when they do reproduce, not every offspring gets to survive to reproductive success. So we talk about pre-zygotic selection and post-zygotic selection. The boundary there is precisely the zygote, which is the beginning of the new individual for whatever species. Okay, so that's all background. Now I think that we have enough concepts and language to look at evolution in one species, which is the human, which is actually going to be a group, because we also have, we see from the fossil record of humans that there has been branching also. So other species of hominins, in fact, of the genus Homo, HOMO, we have fossil record evidence that there are other species of Homo which are now extinct. So we can say that today, the only living species of Homo, of the genus Homo, is Homo sapiens. In fact, you can take it down to the subspecies Homo sapiens sapiens. You see that in a number of technical journals and articles, Homo sapiens sapiens, so even at the level of subspecies. I don't want to get too much into species versus subspecies because it's still a little controversial, all right? For example, the dog is a subspecies of the wolf, technically, Canis lupus familiaris versus Canis lupus lupus. However, remember, we're sticking by the biological definition of species, which is Meyer's definition. There are other definitions of species that are non-biological. In other words, they're not based on reproductive success. They're based on niche appropriation, for example. Those would be ecological definitions of species, niche appropriation and success within a particular habitat and so forth. But they're a little more blurry. I prefer the biological definition, though it has its own limitations, because, for example, if the wolf and a dog, or a particular breed of dog, of course, I don't think a Chihuahua is going to make it with a wolf, right? It's not going to survive. But maybe a Great Dane or maybe a German Shepherd could survive, you know, the rivalry with a wolf, whether it's a male wolf with a female shepherd or vice versa, probably more likely the male wolf with a female dog, right? They could possibly mate and have offspring, but then the remaining question is about the offspring. I'll give you an example of two subspecies that could possibly mate and have puppies. What about the puppies? Not fertile. They may or may not be fertile. I really don't know. I'm sure the experiment has been done, okay? So that gets to the issue about subspecies, you know, whether they strictly qualify, they fit into the biological definition, because they could mate, they have puppies, but then are the puppies fertile or not? It remains to be seen. That needs to be, those puppies needs to grow, and it's anybody's guess whether they're gonna be hybrids, meaning infertile and dead end, or actually species by being capable of mating. And then it's an interesting thought. I'm just playing it out mentally. Those puppies, let's say of a male wolf and a female German Shepherd, right? If those puppies were fertile, if they're capable of fertilizing on the wolf line or on the dog line, there's a distinction. So maybe they can fertilize on the wolf side, but not on the dog side, or vice versa. Or maybe one puppy can fertilize on the wolf side and another puppy on the dog side. You know, so you have variation. You have different possibilities that could occur. So you have to play it out then for another generation, the F2 and the F3 and F4. All right, and then you start getting, by the time you get down to several generations, and they still remain fertile at some level, we're on the way to speciation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Back to the human then. What we're going to look is the evidence, the scientific evidence, the evolutionary evidence, or the natural evidence, all right, the organic evidence for the evolution of the human species, of Homo sapiens sapiens. How did we get here? Has nothing to do with the why are we here. Those are philosophical and theological questions. Why are we here? What is the meaning of our existence? Where did we come from originally? And what is our ultimate end after death, potentially? All right, those are philosophical and theological questions which are legitimate in those fields, but science, empirical science, has nothing to say about that because can't be measured, not empirical, all right? Cannot be measured with a particular instrument. All right, but we can still reason about them. We can still philosophize and theologize about them. So this is the line of evidence, beginning with the phylogeny and then the fossil record. Then we're going to look at skull sizes because you can see intuitively the best, the most prized fossil typically is a skull, especially for vertebrates and for those of us animals who have an internal skeleton, right? So I don't think it's too important for skull size in ants and butterflies and so forth, but for the vertebrates and especially for mammals and especially for the hominids, these are the most prized fossils, is the skull. And then we're going to see variation within skulls and an interaction or a relationship or an association between the skull size and cultural development. In other words, it's not the actual skull, but what used to be inside the skull, namely the brain and the size of the brain. All right, then we're going to look at bipedalism, tools, use of tools, and development of tools that make tools, which is another layer or another level of sophistication. Not just using tools, but making tools to make tools. Then harnessing fire, and finally culture. And so here with culture, we're going to be at the doorstep of introducing the philosophical and theological arguments, particularly based on the Judeo-Christian tradition, all right? So let's move forward. Let's look at phylogeny first. And here, the classification, the biological classification of Homo sapiens is very useful. This is, remember, this is the Linnaean classification, Carolus Linnaeus, you know, all the way from the 17th century, 1600. So really the beginning of modern science, excuse me, about 500 years ago in Europe, predated by the Copernican revolution and all that. So first it started with pretty much astronomy and the transition from astrology to astronomy. And then it started getting down into biology as such. The classification of living things with a binomial, in other words, two names, the genus and the species, okay? When we look at the human classification, this is the whole set of classification, beginning with the domain, Eukarya, then the kingdom, Animalia, phylum, chordate, class, mammal, order, primate, family, hominid. This is the category that you may not be as familiar with, the tribe, all right? And this has an anthropological meaning of tribe, not just a common social, cultural meaning of tribe, but an anthropological meaning of tribe, which is more rigorous and more formal. And it's between family and genus. When we get to the genus of our species, of course, Homo, right? Which is kind of our last name, biologically speaking. And then the species itself, Homo sapiens, our individual name. When we look at this in a chart, it would look something like this with representatives at each level. So let's take it from the top at the level of domain eukarya, eukaryotes, right? It's a compound word, just to remember and review. Karyos is a reference, it's Greek, karyo. Whenever you see a K and a Y, pretty much that comes from the Greek. Karyos is a reference to what? The nucleus, right? The nucleus with a membrane, more like the nuclear membrane, encasing the nucleus, encasing the DNA. So it's a membrane within a membrane. The cell already has a cell membrane, and now there's a second membrane within, which is also a bilayer membrane, very similar to the cell membrane. That's the nuclear membrane to encase the DNA. So it's a protection of a protection, all right? Similar to pregnancy, it's a double protection. The first protection is the body of the mother. The second protection, or the inner protection, is the actual, the amniotic membranes, the amnion, the chorion, that envelope the child within. Actually, there we could talk about 3 layers. The first layer being the body of the mother, the second layer being the uterus itself, which is a muscle. And then the third layer, the innermost layer, is the amniotic membrane containing the fluid and the embryo within. That's for mammals. All right, so karyas is the nucleus, reference to a true, and true, eo is true or real. So real nucleus as compared to, contrasted with prokaryotes before they have a true nucleus, all right? So that's the first divergence here of the 3 domains, eukaryotes with prokaryotes and archaea. So at that level, we share a commonality with all living, with all animals that have a true nucleus. All animals and plants and fungi that have a true nucleus at the level of eukaryotes, okay? Then we go to the kingdom, the level of kingdom, the animal kingdom, which means that we share common characteristics at this level with all other animals, but we have already diverged from the plants and the fungi, okay? So there's a first divergence there between plants and fungi and animals. Within the kingdom of the animals, we get down now to the phylum, of which there are about 24 phyla, okay? There we are in the chordates. In other words, not only an internal skeleton, but a skeleton that is articulated. Actually, that's the subphylum, is vertebrates. We're better known for vertebrates, the 5 groups of vertebrates, right? The fish, the amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. But keep in mind that vertebrata is a subphylum of the chordata, right? The chordata is a reference to a cord, a notochord. Cord. In other words, what we call the spinal cord is just that the next level is that spinal cord is articulated, meaning that we have vertebrae. And that is a further advantage because first it gives us a certain rigidity of the internal skeleton, all right? So you notice that we vertebrates are the largest animals around on average. And so it gives us certain rigidity to have more, to offer more resistance to gravity, holding us down small. But at the same time, flexibility because of the articulation of the vertebrae. So we have with the vertebrates, we have kind of the best of both worlds. We have an internal skeleton that allows us to be larger physically than other animals. And at the same time, with the vertebrae, with the articulation of that cord, we have flexibility also. And then there are other articulations in the body, typically at the appendages, meaning the elbows and the knees, right? And then when you get down to the extremities, the actual digits, whether it's the toes or the hands, we have further articulation there. All right, going beyond that, so we share with the chordates, we mammals share with the chordates other groups, other classes in the chordates, which are going to be basically fish, reptiles, birds, and amphibians. Drilling further down into the class within the phylum, the next level of divergence is class. So in the class, we are mammals. So here we have already diverged at the level of class, we have diverged with the other chordates, specifically the fish, the reptilians, the birds, and the amphibians. Okay. Drilling further down, within class, we have orders. We are in the order of the primates. There are other orders that are not primates. There are other mammals that are not primates. For example, the ungulates. The ungulates are the ones that walk on their nails, especially the nail of the middle finger, the middle toe, and that's going to be horses, zebras, etc. Right? They wear mules, donkeys. They walk on the extension of their nail, which has thickened tremendously and has become a hoof. Then there are also some marine mammals, and which are not primates. These are all different orders. Delphinidae, there are marine mammals that are not primates, but we share the class of mammals. But at the level of order, then we are primates. Okay, drilling within the order, we get down to family. At the family, we are hominid, and we share with the hominids other families. Okay. Further within the family, like I mentioned, this one, tribe. This is where we're going to concentrate mostly at the tribe level, and then get eventually down to the genus level. But mostly on the tribe, which is called hominin. Okay, so this was, let's say, the most recent divergence within the hominids, with the family of hominids, the most recent divergence into the genus Homo, right? That occurred at the level of the tribe hominin. So there are other tribes here that are not hominin, and therefore they're not going to be Homo either, because the genus Homo is within the tribe of the hominin. And this is going to be like the last big Y on the road, divergence, the node. Okay, then finally from Homo, how do we get to Homo sapiens? And the other Homos that have been found in the fossil record, which are today extinct, about half a dozen more or less, that have been found to date. Let's look a little bit about this. I'm going to start, I think it's at the level of order. Yeah, the level of order, because class mammals is just still too broad. See, at the level of class, mammal, where we share with many other mammals that are not primates, okay? So it's a big divergence there. For example, we have some percentage homology with zebras and with dolphins, but they are quite diverse and quite distinct from us. So let's start with the order of primates, which begin to look more similar to us. And here is at the level of primates, look at all of the classes, class, order, family, all the different families that it includes. Not only the monkeys, but also other creatures called lemurs. They look like this. Tarsiers, and then the great apes. So we have, for example, the old world monkeys, the new world monkeys, so forth. And then these are lemurs. They diverged earlier. Then the tarsiers and lorises and potos, this other one called bush babies, these are all of the branch of the lemurs. That was the first divergence here. Remember, each one of these is a node. So that's a big node here. Big divergence. So we're on this branch of that divergence, which occurred, imagine, estimated between 70 to 60 million years ago. Right? And again, phylogenetics. So this is by comparing percentage homology of existing species. These are all existing species today. So we would have a higher percentage homology with the, what is known as the old world monkeys than with the new world monkeys. And we would have a higher percentage homology with the new world monkeys than with the tarsiers. higher percentage homology with the tarsiers than with this group of the lemurs and bush babies and so forth. Okay, so this was the earliest divergence here, about 60 to 70 million years ago. Let's bring it all the way down to about 20 million years, between 30 and 20 million years ago, the divergence between the old world monkeys, for example, the mandrill, and the apes known as the great apes. So we go down to the level of family. Remember, class, order, family. Simple way to remember that those three steps there is that if there is no order in the class, there's no possible teaching the family anything, the family of students. Okay, we got class, order, family. Let's look at the family of hominids. This is, again, the scientific classification of the human. We belong to the family of hominids, scientifically speaking. What do they look like? Well, these are known as the great apes, and essentially four families there: the orangutan, the gorilla, the chimp, and the human. And I've just given you the percentage homology in parentheses here. We share 97% homology with orangutans. 97% of our genome is identical to the orangutan genome, all right? 97%, but that's the entire genome. Coding region is a different story, all right? Because remember, of our genome, only 3% is actually coding. Don't confuse that 3% with this 3% difference. In other words, this is percentage of homology of the entire genome. With gorillas, 98%. And with the chimps, I've mentioned 99%. Okay. It's interesting that the photo is also informative because it's showing the chimp here with a stone on its hand. Likely, this is a male chimp, and this is likely the alpha male defending his harem. So this is a weapon, okay? Probably the most primitive weapon, which is to throw something at somebody else. Whether it's of the same species or it could be a lion or a lioness that's looming nearby. But most likely, what the chimp is going to do in the face of a lioness, he's going to climb a tree, a very tall tree. It's better to flight in that sense, not to fight. Okay, so that's at the level of family. Therefore, we need to drill in further to the level of the whole thing of the tribe. Okay, that's why we're going to look at tribe. We diverged from the chimp, according to the fossil record, anywhere 5 to 8 million years ago. So this is a scale of millions of years here. It's not to scale, all right? It's expanded, it's kind of logarithmic here. You can see that the expansion between the present and 1 million years ago is a longer span than between 8 and 9 million years ago. It's very evident that this is longer. So this is not to scale. Obviously, 1 million year is the same time as another million year, right? So you notice that the scale has been stretched out. Why? Just to be able to fit the fossils that have been found, okay? The shape and size of the fossil. So it's for the purpose of illustration. But keep in mind that this kind of logarithmic stretching that has been done here has to be compressed back to a chronological equivalency. So the alternative to do this is to make the whole scale more expanded, but then it wouldn't fit on a page. It wouldn't fit on the page of the textbook. It would be just too long. So just keep that in mind. All right, so the divergence on the broad sense is between 8 and 5 million years ago. In other words, beyond, further back than 8 million years, there was a common ancestor. By the time we get to 5 million years ago, there's definitely two different branches, two tribes of the hominins. One that is going to be hominini, and the other one is going to be the gorillini, all right? And so that's in the broad sense is 8 to 5 million years ago. In the narrow sense is 7 to 6 million years ago. So depends how enthusiastic you want to be about this, and how you can argue forever back and forth, but what is constraining our narrowing down the divergence here, the node, to a particular, to within 1 or 2 million years? What is constraining us? What are these things here? These are representatives of fossils, right? Of course, we got plenty of skulls of the recent, of contemporary, we got plenty of skulls of those in luxury of detail, including variation, of which I'm going to talk about a little later. But we're constrained by the paucity of the fossil record. So this is a word that comes up again and again. Paucity is just kind of an old word. It comes from pauper, pauperimus, which is poor. The poverty of the fossil record in what sense? Not that these guys didn't have any money or little money, no, it's just the scarcity. So in contemporary terms, we can talk about the scarcity of the fossil record. We just haven't found every fossil that is out there because many fossils are still buried within sedimentary layers and we haven't discovered them. A river has not gone through that sediment to wash away the sediment enough to actually see the fossil, or uplifting of the mountain or the hill, whatever, okay? That's number one. Number two, we can also intuit that we just don't have a fossil of every individual that has died of whatever species, a million years ago. In fact, most of those corpses and skeletons got crushed and pulverized and became part of the nutrients of the soil. All right, so we don't really have that many fossils to begin with. And of those that we can conceive were fossilized, we just haven't discovered them. Or they may be fragmented and dispersed and so forth. Okay, so this is the divergence estimated by the experts. On the broad sense, 5 to 8 million years ago. On the narrow sense, 7 to 6 million years ago. All right, let's drill a little further here. This is from Barton, the other source that I mentioned. Okay. So we start with a common ancestor here, which is known as Astralopithecus. And the Australopithecines is just a, so Australo, the word Australo is a reference to the southern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere, that's where Australia is the continent in the southern hemisphere that is all by its lonesome out there in the Pacific Ocean. So Australia is a reference to the southern hemisphere, south of the equator, simply because most of these fossils have been found in Africa, in Equatorial Africa, and what is known as Sub-Sahara Africa, all right, which is considered to be the birthplace of our species and of the genus, in fact, Homo. So the capital H here is a reference to Homo, all right? Here is the divergence with the Australopithecines between 3 and 2 million years ago. Between 3 and 2 million years ago is estimated to have been the divergence, excuse me, between the Australopithecines, in other words, the southern apes, and the Homo, the Homo genus. What does this look like? Rebuilding on the fossil record. This is the Australopithecine line, not the Homo. This is the branching, okay? So divergence has already occurred here between the Australopithecines, the southern apes, and Homo, our branch, our genus. And there's about a dozen of these different species from the fossil record. Here is 3 of them. Sahelanthropus, Ardipithecus, and Astralopithecus. What has been found, which are fragments of skulls and other parts of the body, but the skull is the one that is most of interest because of the cranial size in cubic centimeters of the cranium. So these are reconstructions, and the typical thing is this very high brow of the skull, which is very typical of apes themselves. It makes their face kind of flat, all right? That high ridge here on the brow. And simultaneously, a relatively low skull size behind the brow, behind the ridge of the brow, relatively small skull. And we see that gradually in the fossil record as they are dated, the brow gets smaller, the ridge of the brow gets smaller, and the skull size gets larger. The cubic centimeters of the skull gets larger. Okay? It's a gradual but definite procession there from the fossil record as they're being dated. So also we see that the denture, the teeth structure is changing somewhat, from more vegetarian to more heterodont, various teeth. Typically at least the three main categories, which are the molars for grinding, that's on the vegetarian side. The canines for tearing, that's on the carnivore side. And then the incisors for clipping, which could be used both for clipping vegetables or for clipping meat, all right? The incisors at the front. So those are the three main categories of the teeth morphology, which is pointing to a physiology, is pointing to the feeding habits of these animals. Okay, so that's on the Australopithecine side. What does it look like on the Homo side, the genus Homo? This is on the Homo side, all right? Again, about a dozen different fossils here, beginning with Homo, the first divergence, Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis. Okay. Homo habilis is a reference to the rest of the skeleton, especially digits of the hand, because at this point there is already bipedalism. So the hands are basically free for interacting with the environment, making tools specifically, not only using tools, but actually making tools. So that's the first divergence there. From habilis to this one, ergaster. Ergaster is a reference to rising, to becoming upright. But you can see that gradually the brain size is getting larger, the skull is getting larger. Erectus, fully bipedal. This also has to do with prints on the mud in Equatorial Africa. Antecessor is a reference to being the antecedent, the beforehand of this other one, which is a very significant fossil record, Heidelbergensis. This is a reference to a town in Germany, what is today Germany, which is called Heidelberg. So that's why it was named. Sometimes it's because of a particular characteristic of the individual, the way they're named scientifically, like erectus is fully bipedal, or it's a reference to the town or the place where they're discovered, like Heidelbergensis, or Rudolfensis is a reference to the guy who discovered the fossil, Mr. Rudolph. Okay, so it varies according to how much pride the discoverer has to put her or his name on the fossil, or the fossil, or to actually name it a little more informatively, by either the function or at least the place where it was discovered. All right, when we start putting some flesh on these fossils, and keep in mind there are fragments that what is done is kind of a two-stage, broadly two-stage. If they find pieces of a jaw, for example, mandible with some teeth, hopefully, and then a piece of a skull that match, then by computer tomography, they make a model of these pieces, and then by computer, they fill in the rest according to the pieces that they have found, how the rest of the skull would look like, and they do a reconstruction, a virtual computer tomographic reconstruction of the skull. And then they make an actual cast of that, a physical cast, typically in some material, some plastic material today. And then they start filling in from the bones. So these are reconstructions of habilis. Seldom is the entire skull found intact like this, okay? But sometimes they get lucky. And so the skull, like I say, is reconstructed, excuse me, including the mandibles. And then what happens on top of this, they start, these are experts, anatomists, and paleoanthropologists who know in detail skulls and how the muscles would be attached according to this structure, according to this morphology, where the muscles would be and what size the muscles would actually be. So they use clay or other materials to simulate the muscles that are layered on top of the skull. And then after that, they would actually use other kind of clay putty to simulate like the adipose tissue or the connective tissue, which is a layer in between our muscle layer and the actual skin, the layers of skin, the epidermis and the dermis, okay? So they go all the way out to the epidermis, outer layer, and then they put hair on that. So these are reconstructions, approximations of how they would look based on the fossil record itself. All right, so I've given you here kind of 3 bits of information. First, the scientific name for each one of these skull discoveries. Different species, but you notice they all share the same genus, Homo, capital H. Then the reconstruction from the fossil record to the best of their ability, and these are real experts. They actually study cadavers layer by layer and so forth, not only of humans, but of other animals, primates, specifically to see how the muscles are articulated with the bones and so forth. And then finally, underneath here is an approximately time scale in millions of years ago, MYA, millions of years ago. And if we go through the transition, we look at these 2 phases from habilis to Neanderthalis, we can ask the question, which one is more monkey-like? I think we would agree that habilis is more monkey type and Neanderthalis is more human-like. Okay, so just a question, an intuitive question, looking at their faces, even the facial expression of some possible emotion there. So I would say if we had to split Neanderthalis, does it look more monkey-like or more human-like? In my opinion, looks more human-like, whereas habilis here at the other end of the older date for Homo, to me, he definitely looks more monkey-like, all right? So on the broad sense, basically, we go back to about 2 million years ago. On the narrow sense, by the time we get to 0.2 million years ago, 0.2 million years ago, all right, which is within the range of Neanderthal. Look at the range of Neanderthal here. From about 500,000 years, a little over 500,000 years, to 0.004 million years ago, okay? So this is hundreds of thousands, right? This tens of thousands, this is thousands. Is for 40,000 million years ago, right? That's the most recent skeletons of Neanderthal with some actual tissue on it. So it's not just fossil, actual tissue. Okay, so by the time we get to the fossils of 0.2 million years ago, all right, we find that basically anatomically there's no difference with modern man. Anatomically, there's no difference on the Homo sapiens that we have found there. So anatomically, no difference with modern man. But you notice I keep stressing anatomically. Another layer of complexity is going to be culturally. Obviously, culturally, there is a difference because these Homo sapiens, these humans here, 0.2 million years ago, right? So in other words, 200,000. How do we translate this into thousands? Well, this is 200,000 years ago. These are the cave men and women, all right? These are the Flintstone type. These are the cave men and women, which obviously their culture is very different, much more primitive compared to our culture today. For example, they didn't have cell phone. They hadn't harnessed electricity. They had harnessed fire, but not electricity, okay? And so forth. So culturally different, but anatomically, if we wash them, give them a shower and shave them, they would look basically like we would. Okay. All right, now, I also want to go back to the paucity of the fossil record and put a caveat on this because these are fossils that have been found, but they're few in number, okay? And also where they were found, the range of distribution. For some, it's kind of narrow. For others, it's more broad. For some species, there are few individual skulls that have been found. On others, more skulls have been found. Typically for Neanderthal, many more skulls than for habilis. So how do we know? The question is, how do we know how representative these are of that particular species? Because these are all variants within the species. I'm not talking about in between species. I'm talking about variation within the species. In other words, how do we know that this skull is the average skull of habilis? Or could it be that this is like an extreme variant, you know, that had a super high ridge, but most habilis at that time did not really have that high ridge? You understand what I'm saying? In other words, whatever individual fossil we look at, that is going to be a variant within that species. How do we know how close that variant is to the norm? We don't know. How representative is the species? Let me give you a graphic example. Let's say that we have, sadly, a catastrophic event within this year or next year on Earth. Basically, a meteorite that was large enough to penetrate through the atmosphere and hit the Earth again, like it happened possibly 60 to 70,000 years ago, 70 million years ago, and it's up wiping out the human race in a relatively short period of time, within a few years. All the human race, which could be, 8 to 9 billion individuals within a year or so, all right, let's say 8 billion, we all die within a few years. We're going to be buried in sediment and so forth. So there are going to be plenty of fossils, right, going forward, of the 8 billion that we are throughout the whole Earth. So basically, and we have a planetary distribution of this one species. So that would be a treasure trove of some alien anthropologist that is going to come to this Earth, and paleoanthropologists. It's like, let's fast forward 5 or 10 million years. Now we're all fossils. Our skeletons are all fossils. But only a few are discovered. And maybe the few that are discovered are very tall people, the assumption of those paleoanthropologists, aliens, is going to be that we were all taller than we really were because of the particular specific fossils that they discovered. See what I'm saying? Or it could have been that they discovered midgets. They're going to assume, how safe is it to assume that we were all actually midgets, smaller than we actually are? Understood? So in other words, all these fossils are variants within that particular species. How do we know that this variant is representative or not? Well, we just don't. Because what do we compare it to? We have to compare it to other skulls of the same species and see how much variation there is there, okay? And so this issue of variation is important. It puts a, it puts some caveats, some caution on assuming that this reconstruction from this skull is actually representative. This is how most habilis look like. We don't know. This is how most Neanderthals look like. We have more assurance on this side of the scale than on this side of the scale, simply because we have more fossils, more individual skulls of the same species. Yes, exactly. We have to estimate the number of individuals within that population, the number of populations of different populations of the same species that were around, because we had Neanderthal, for example. Neanderthal was fairly successful in Europe for a time in this range until we appeared, and basically it was a competitive exclusion principle. We wiped them out, meaning sapiens wiped out Neanderthals from Europe specifically, and that is fairly well documented in the fossil record, right? But before we wiped them out, Neanderthals were fairly successful. So there are Neanderthal populations in what is today Spain and France and Germany and Italy and so forth. And these different populations had diverged enough geographically that they were not interbreeding significantly. But they're all the same species. Okay, it was just geographical, like for instance, the Alps for Italy, the Pyrenees for France, and so forth. All right, so large mountain ranges. Some individuals managed to get across, and then whether they made it or not with the other population is a different story. But they're all the same species and different populations in Europe. Okay, so how representative? Maybe one population, let's say the Spaniard population of Neanderthal, on average was 1 or 2 inches taller than the average Neanderthal in Italy. Okay, we'd have to look at the fossil record in detail. It gets interesting, huh? Okay, so let's do some comparative anatomy of bones here, of skulls. Again, these are computer reconstructions of the fossil record. The only two that are current would be this one, which is the chimpanzee, pan troglodytes, and the human, Homo sapiens. So these two are current, and therefore they're more accurate because these are actual CTs, computer tomographs of their skulls. The others are reconstruction of fragments, more or less intact, all right? So when we look at the divergence, we put a time lapse on it from the Paninins and the Hominins divergence, that 5 to 8 million years ago that I talked about, the southern apes from the Hominin, all right, from these two tribes. We see that the chimp has, on average, 400 cubic centimeters of skull space. So it is safe to assume that the brain is about 400 cubic centimeters, the brain size, the brain volume. Then we are now in the hominin line here. These are all hominin tribe, okay? Hominin tribe. We're looking specifically at skull size, volume of the brain. When we get to the Australopithecine, about 3 to 4 million years ago, 450 is the average volume of the brain. Into the genus itself, 3 to 2 million years ago, narrowing down, Habilis, which is the first one, the oldest one, about 2.5 million years ago, has 550. So there's a slight increase here of 100 to 150 cc's more or less. Well, you know, that's about 20% increase, right? From 400 to 500, it's a 22% increase. But then look at the jump between habilis and erectus in less than 1 million years. Okay, in about 5 to 7 million years, look at the jump. Double, almost double. Something happened here significantly. Already in the Homo line of genus, okay, so we're down to species here, different species. There was a huge jump in brain size from habilis to erectus. And it can be dated to between 2.5 to 1.8 million years ago in Equatorial Africa. Yes, because of the carbon-14 and the other isotopes that is done on the fossil record itself, on the fossil. So they can be dated fairly accurately within hundreds of thousands of years from each other in Equatorial Africa, where they were found physically. So they're not living in, you know, Alaska or anywhere else. This was Equatorial Africa. So we're going to look at the geography of Equatorial Africa and looking at the rest of the environment to see what happened, what transition happened in Equatorial Africa precisely in this time between 3 and 1 million years ago. There was a change in climate that was fairly drastic and a transition of the vegetation. I'll get to that a little bit later. But you notice that here was a fairly big jump between these two species of the same genus, Homo. Between habilis and erectus, almost twice the brain size. Whereas previously, for about 4 to 5 million years of evolution, there was very little, about 20% increase in brain size, brain volume. You follow? And that was a much larger time scale. Let's say we take the middle of this, 6.5 million years to 2.5 million years, that's 4 million years, all right, relatively less brain development than within this narrow range here of less than 500,000 years, about 500,000. Okay, then Neanderthal, another jump again from 1,000 to 1,500. In fact, this is the largest skull size, even larger than us at 1,350. This is the average skull size or brain volume for an adult human, 1,350, okay, throughout the world. This is a very robust number because we have literally billions of skulls that can be measured with no damage to the skull or to the individual by a CT scan, which is a non-invasive diagnostic tool, right? All right, so the average skull brain size, brain volume for the human is 1,350 cubic centimeters, 1,350 cubic centimeters on average for the adult. And for the Neanderthal, about 1,500, and actually larger skull you can see here, all right, from the skulls that have been found, again, putting in the caveat of the paucity of the record, but it's a fairly good number. It's not as robust as this one, of course, larger margin of error, but still, on average, the Neanderthal had a bigger brain than the human, basically. That's the argument here. So we see several things with these comparative tomographies. The jump from the southern apes to the Homo line is about a 20% skull increase, brain size. And then within the Homo genus, a doubling of the skull size from one species to the other here, from habilis to erectus, and then a 50% increase again down to Neanderthal, and later a diminishing of the skull size, and still yet with a smaller brain, literally with a smaller brain, we managed to displace Neanderthals in Europe specifically. Okay, so this is way out of Africa already. So the larger brain size was definitely not a selective advantage, an evolutionary advantage, may have been a disadvantage. Because keep in mind, to keep this brain alive, there has to be something below the neck, what we call the rest of the body. And the rest of the body was actually larger. So it could have been that being larger was a disadvantage instead of an advantage. Maybe they were not as agile. So smaller may have been more agile and got around them, you know, the bigger brutes. So the brute in body size, but not in brain because they had a larger brain. Also, the other thing is that the brain size, the volume, says nothing about the level or extent of convolution. What do I mean by convolution? The sulci, the infolding of the brain, okay? Which is actually where the higher thinking process occurs. What we call abstract thought occurs mostly on the surface of the brain. But that surface is not just an even surface around the brain. No, there are convolutions, right? There's the infolding of the brain. Think of any diagram of the brain. What I'm talking about. See how it folds in and out. These are called the sulci or the convolutions. The brain surface, right? What is known as the gray matter folds in and out. So really when you stretch this out, I always forget how much it is. How much surface it is. It's several feet, square feet. Let's look at text, see if it gives us. Just want to know the surface. I can find it quickly, maybe. One of you can look online, surface area. Let's see. It's going to take me to an article. My apologies for not having dug this out earlier. But, anyway, I'll look at it during the break, okay? So that we don't take class time. But basically what I want to say is that when we look at the brain and all the folding of the brain, right? That's where the thinking activity occurs. So just measuring skull size and brain volume doesn't really tell us how many convolutions, how much surface area there actually was. Therefore, when we compare these skulls, we really don't know. We don't have an intact brain of a Neanderthal, all right? So we don't know how much convolutions they actually had for thinking, for the abstract thoughts. But they had to have some, and quite a bit, particularly because of the material culture that they left behind. I'm going to talk about material culture in the second half of the lecture, and you'll see what I mean. So by their time, they were truly pretty sophisticated, all right? You'll see what I mean in the second half of the lecture. But I want to stick with these skulls then, and just point out what should be obvious for us now, which is variation. Again, here's an example of variation of the human skull. Compare this skull to this one, for example, or this one, these two. Look at how flat the face is here and how pronounced the upper jaw is on this. These are all contemporary skulls of humans by CT, right? Computer tomograph, which is a non-invasive tool like the MRI, right? By transmitting waves through the head, and the skull can be individuated. And so you can see the variety of faces also. Look at the eye sockets, how they differ from each other. Look at this side. This poor guy is very depressed. It looks depressed, but this is actually the skull. You know, this is not the facial expression. So you can compare all these skulls with each other. Look at that, how the jaws project on some and not on others. Okay. The cheekbones projecting out beyond, for example, here, the upper mandible is actually embedded within the cheekbones, but here it's projecting out. Very drastic differences between these skulls. These are all human beings, contemporary Homo sapiens sapiens of today. All right, so there's variation. Which one of these skulls will we find? We don't know. That could be a variant. You know, it could be that most, I think this kind of an exaggeration of a flat face, and this an exaggeration of a pronounced upper jaw. So this looks like more of the average skull. I haven't seen too many human skulls really to ascertain in detail what is the average, but this looks to me to be more of an average. But maybe this one was not found in the fossil record. Maybe this one was found first. Okay, so variance, that's the caveat when these reconstructions are done. And we don't know how representative these figures are, these reconstructions. All right, one last detail here on skull size. This graph is informative because it starts on the x-axis, which is time, 2.5 million years ago, precisely when we have the divergence between the hominini and the paninini, right? So we get into now the genus Homo. So these are all genus. These first are actually panini, all right? So the Homo, the homini start here, 2.5 million years ago to the present. And then on the y-axis is cubic centimeters of skull volume, cubic centimeters of skull volume, increasing. Okay, again, the scales are not logarithmic. I'm sorry, they're not linear, they're logarithmic. You can see 100,000 scale here and between 1 and 2 million. So the scales are not linear, they're logarithmic, including the brain size also, because otherwise this scale, if we made it linear, it would just go off the page, too large. So it's compressed. At any rate, it fits the data, it fits the fossils. Different squares and triangles represent different fossil categories or different species. Excuse me. The yellow compared to the red first. The yellow are panini. The red are hominini. All right. So you see the panini here. There's a gradual development on as we get closer to the present. Larger is an increase in brain size, at least in skull volume. Then when we get into the hominini, each different figure, whether it's a square or a triangle, represents a different species. And then whether the figure is full or colored in or not colored in, right? So full color or empty is again another species just to distinguish the different Homo species here until we get to the human here. Of course, we have many more fossils of Homo sapiens sapiens because it's the most recent one. But you notice, follow the trend lines. The trend lines are the slopes that are numbered from 1 to 6, okay? These are the slopes from 1 to 6. There is definitely a high rising slope here at the beginning. That was a shift from the 1500 to the 1000. And then the other 50% increase from 1000 to 1500 is here. The slopes are more gradual, as you can see, more gradual. But then the final slope is very interesting because all of these slopes from 1 to 5 are positive slopes, right? There's a gradual but steady increase in brain size from more ancient to more recent. on the fossil record. Gradual increase because all of these slopes are positive, greater or lesser steepness. But then when we get to slope number 6, which represents anatomically modern human, from the fossil record, right? Because we have people here that go all the way back, these open circles, to about 80,000 years ago. Obviously, they're not alive today, therefore they're fossils, right? Look at this. That final slope here is a downward slope. So that represents what? A decrease in the skull size to the average 1350. But you notice the spread, the range is also a bigger range. The point that some fossils actually have about an 1850 skull size, and they were around maybe 20, 30,000 years ago, okay? So it's a broader range simply because there are more fossils. There's less paucity of the record, but definitely a downward slope, which is the first. There's a diminishing in the brain size. All I'm trying to say by all this argument is that, yes, brain size, an increase in brain size is an advantage in evolution to get to the Homo sapiens sapiens, but to a limit. It's not indefinite, it's not open-ended brain size. In other words, we get to kind of an optimal. If we were to draw a hypothetical line connecting all these dots, we would get a bump, we would get a hump, so that the brain size optimized for the size of the rest of the body and maintaining, because the rest of the body, essentially, functionally, the rest of the body is in charge of maintaining the brain alive. For example, the external of the body, by surviving in the environment and by procuring nourishment, and then the internal of the body, the heart, to keep circulation, what? To keep oxygen and nutrients going to the brain. The lungs, to oxygenate the brain. The digestive system, to pull out nutrients to keep the brain alive. So you can think of, functionally, you can think from the neck down is the support system of the brain, right? And so it could be that we have reached an optimal brain size with a 1350 average for becoming the most successful species on Earth, to the point that we are global, all right? We have been able to live in every single environment and habitat in the world, including underwater. I'm sure you've heard of the underwater hotels, right? On the coastline of a number of pretty islands down in the South Pacific, where you can go underwater and spend a day or a week and just watch the nature go by. Underwater hotels and of course experimental stations and so forth. But we have conquered even the capacity to live in no space at all, which is floating in space. The ICC, you know the ICC, the International Space Station? No. ISS, sorry, thank you. ISS, yes. This is the largest artifact that humanity has made, all right? And it's all run by solar panels, and it's a collaboration between several nations of the world. It's been up there, I think, maybe 10 years more, and they keep adding pieces to it little by little. Recently, they sent a rocket up there with water, with liquid water, that they needed water, okay? They recycle their water and everything. But this is the largest artifact we've ever made, and it's literally out in thin air, you know, in space, orbiting around the Earth. And the way you can get to, there's a site where you can look at the camera that is live, that is pointing to the Earth of the ISS. It's fascinating. You can explore it. There's a site where you can explore the ISS online. Okay, so we may have reached, evolutionarily speaking, the optimal brain size for Earth, for living and being successful on this planet, basically anywhere on Earth, especially with the development of culture. Now, let's back out a little bit and see that of the hominins, of the tribe of the hominins, okay, which is just before genus. We are the only existing species right now, and genus, we are the only genus also with only Homo existing, but there's evidence of at least 6 different species. 6 different species that have been found on the fossil record. Distinct species, according to the experts, yes. So, in general, for the tribe of the hominin, the big biological characteristic is bipedal, freeing up the hands for an increased survival and for developing culture. At the biological level or the behavioral level, okay, we have the brain size, which is more on the physiological side, and then tool making, which is an interface between physiological and behavioral, and then using fire or harnessing fire, which is definitely more on the behavioral side. So again, the divergence on the narrow side between 7 and 6 million years ago for the tribe, but then we have to drill within the tribe and distinguish between the panini, that will be about, on the narrow side, well, 3 to 2 million years ago. Let's look at bipedalism for a moment, because now when we match the 2 million year fossil data, I'm talking about the divergence between the contemporary apes, okay, specifically the chimp, the orangutan, and the gorilla, and us, because we are the only 4 remaining hominids alive today. That branching had to do with a climate change, with a significant climatological change that occurred in Equatorial Africa, which is where they arose, where the evolution was occurring, all right? And so we trace it back to bipedalism for all of the Homo. And here is a comparison, a graphic comparison between a chimpanzee skeleton and a human skeleton. We have a chimpanzee skeleton on the hallway there, inside one of the classrooms, on a vitrine, on a glass, what do you call that? Exposition. Anyway, we have a skeleton, a reconstruction of a chimp skeleton, and you'll notice they are going down on 4 legs. This is called knuckle walking, because the chimps can certainly walk on they can walk on 2 legs, on their hind legs, but periodically they have to come down on all 4. Okay, they have to come down on all 4 because it gets, they don't have an S-shaped curve on their backs. They don't have the S shape, and therefore, I want to see knuckle walking in chimp, which is the one that's closer. They can walk for quite some time on 2 legs, on the hind legs, but after a while they just get tired and they have to go down on all 4 again. They have to go down on their forward limbs, on their forelimbs, because they get tired. And the reason they get tired is because of this bend. You see that their spinal cord is essentially one big curve, one single curve forward, all right? Whereas we have the S shape, especially the lower back, the lumbar region, all right? This is, so our spinal cord is divided into 4 segments. The neck region, then the thoracic region, then the lumbar region below the ribs into the abdominal area, and then finally the coccyx or the tailbone, which are all fused together, the caudal region. But you notice there's an S shape. I'm not talking about the neck, I'm talking about the S shape here. our lower back. This S shape allows us to put the center of gravity of our skeleton squarely on top of the pelvis, the pelvic bone. All right, and the legs are directly below the center of gravity. That allows us, in principle, to be upright, to walk bipedal on two legs indefinitely. All right? Whereas for the chimp, because the center of gravity is actually here, see, due to the curvature. Therefore, periodically, they have to come down on all four. So their hands are not freely, they're not really free. They have to have their hands that are free for a while, but then they have to let go of whatever to come down on the knuckle walking. Now, this is not a cause because we're not Lamarckian. This is an effect. An effect of what? What would trigger, what selective pressure would trigger the ancestor of the chimp to go bipedal? And that's the question. The ancestor of the chimp and the human. What kind of selective pressure could trigger that? And what kind of evidence do we have from the environment that that occurred? All right, that is precisely the transition between a tropical rainforest to a tree savanna, which is intermediate, to eventually a bush savanna, which is what we have today in Africa. All right, so these are three representative photos. Here's a tropical rainforest that you can see is dense. It's dense with trees and shrubs, but essentially to get around here is easier to climb through the trees. And it's also more protective because what's on the ground? Danger. Danger is on the ground, especially from top carnivores. All right? And so, and at that time, remember the saber-toothed tiger? They had quite a bit of armor to hunt down, right? Their prey, which was a huge canine. And we have fossils of these guys. So once this guy chomped down, the prey was not gonna get away likely. The voracious hunters, and they had claws to match. There's a puppy one. And so these were the hunters, these were the top carnivores, and they got to be quite large in size, which was a disadvantage for climbing trees. So it was much safer up there, okay? And what's up there is mostly plant material, fruits, leaves, vegetables. So these were mostly vegetarian, tree climbing vegetarian ancestors to the chimp and the human, the primates. Then what happened was there was a climatological change. Here is a reconstruction of what Africa looked like about 14 million years ago. Look at the greenery on it. In contrast to the gray area or the sandy area, which would be the desertic area, just basically on restricted to three regions: Northwest Africa, kind of the Ivory Coast and that area of the North Atlantic coast of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and this patch down here in Southwest Africa. The rest was pretty green, all right? Tropicalized rainforest. And this was precisely during the tropicalization of the earth. Big swath of tropical rainforest. This is an actual satellite photograph of today. This is an actual photograph where you can see the huge swaths of desertification that has happened, pushing, this is the Sahara, pushing down on equatorial Africa, basically to restrict it to the central equatorial Africa here. And this is the Congo Basin, which is the one of the two big lungs of the earth, the two main lungs, the other one being its equivalent in South America, the Amazon Basin. So this is the Congo Basin of the river, the Congo River, and the Amazon Basin of Amazon River in South America. Okay? This is Lake Victoria, and the other lakes, Turkana and Tanganyika, that we talked about with the cichlids earlier. This is an actual photograph, okay? Madagascar Island. And the southern desert here has also expanded. And so the tropical rainforest is being squeezed. The intermediate phase has transitioned in this fashion to a tree savanna, where the trees are more sparse, further away from each other, and less protection, less leafy, less dense, and less productive also in variety and variation. These are mostly acacia trees today, not much fruit on them, little flowers and so forth, to eventually an actual bush savanna, where you don't have real trees to climb on. Only on certain isolated areas, they become like tree islands. It's similar to what we have in the Everglades with the cypress islands, the cypress tree, the American cypress, the bold cypress that we have in the Everglades, and they make these cypress islands, and the rest is the water basin of the Everglades. Anyway, this is the bush savanna, which you see is more lending toward a terrestrial walking, okay? And then the walking, when the carnivores are coming, the walking has to speed up. And if they have to do that knuckle walking or going down on their four limbs, they're gonna be selected out. So the ones that were able to run a little longer, survive long enough to get into the bush and hide and maybe climb a tree, all right? And so they're the ones who got to pass on their genes. What did they have? These ancestors, I'm talking about ancestors, I'm not talking about modern chimps or modern humans, but I'm talking about ancestors who had a definite curve and a more steep curve. The ones, it's logical to assume that the ones who survived had less of a curvature, where they could, the center of gravity was slightly shifted toward the pelvis, meaning that they could run for a longer period of time and get away from the carnivore. And so the slower guys behind are the ones that got eaten. And these guys that had the less curved spine made it to the tree in time to climb the tree and survive. And so that gene pool got passed on in principle, because they got to reproductive success, whether the other guys in the back of the running line, all right, the rear of the running line got taken out by the carnivores. And the carnivores, once they took down one or two of these, then settled down to eating their prey and let the rest of the line forward run to safety. Excuse me. So you see, we can imagine in our mind's eye, we can reconstruct the scenario. But the selective pressure was definitely, anatomically, was on the less curvature. Well, that less curvature eventually, by chance, mutation, some of these ancestors began to develop a slight curvature. Guess what? They allowed them to run faster for a longer period of time, so that slight S got passed on average to the progeny because they managed to survive, right? That pool of genes managed to survive and pass on the trait to the offspring. So you see, not Lamarckian, but Darwinian. And then by chance, some in the progeny, because of variation, had an even more steep curve, S shape, more pronounced S near the coccyx, near the hip bone. So the hip bone gradually kept displacing more and more toward the current slant that we have today, as opposed to the opposite. If we were to draw a line, a hypothetical slope line through the center of this hip bone, we would see that it has actually a positive slope, right? Whereas this one would have a negative slope pointing forward. In other words, there's a shift that has occurred there. And that shift has brought over the center of gravity squarely on top of the legs for indefinite bipedal walking. All right? Okay. Anyway, it's in there somewhere. And all because of some climatological change that occurred from a tropicalization to a more temperate region, to the point that even to this day, the Sahara continues to advance, and that's why it is estimated, at least according to this type of picture, that we're heading toward a winterization as opposed to a tropicalization of the Earth. It's anybody's guess, but this measures in millions of years, all right, and we just don't have the full time frame for that. Also, I wanted to point out before leaving this slide here, you see the white edge? The white edge here on this reconstruction on the left is actually a superimposition of the current coastline, all right? And you can see that the current coastline superimposed on this picture of 14 million years ago, it's a bigger coastline, it's further out, meaning that on this of this reconstruction of 14 million years ago, the coastline is more receded, right? Because it's a tropicalization. In other words, the sea level was higher. It's not that the continent sank or here that the continent rose above the surface of the ocean. No, it's that here the sea level was actually higher. It was more flooded. All right, the more drastic one is here, the northern part, northeastern part of Africa. In fact, to the point that for a while here, Africa is not connected at the surface, is not connected with Asia. The sea is continuous, so Africa is actually a continent by itself, is surrounded. The Mediterranean is not enclosed, it's open through this region of the Arabic Peninsula, whereas today, this is all landmass. So the landmass is because the ocean has receded, and the ocean has receded because of the poles. In other words, water has been taken up by the two poles, but especially Antarctica, which is much larger by far, and that means that the ocean level has receded, gone down, okay? So definitely a more tropicalized Earth here, a more temperate, moving in the big trend toward a winterization. So this kind of puts also a caveat on the whole issue of global warming, right? You follow? Okay, it's 11:20, so I think this is a good place to stop, because then the other slides, we're gonna get more into the culture of Homo culture, in other words, the behavior. So we've transitioned from, excuse me, from the morphology, meaning specifically the skull size, to the physiology, the volume of the brain, assuming a particular behavior, all right, being able to escape predators. And then from that behavior, we're going to go now into the culture of the Homo genus and how to transition from the different homos that I was showing you here. Okay, there's 6 fossils that have been found of distinct species so far. Any questions or comments at this point? The big transition here, the environmental pressure, selective pressure, I'm talking about natural selection, is a climatological change that within a few million years went from a tropical rainforest to a tree savanna, eventually down to a bush savanna. Climbing to walking or running, okay? So bipedalism. But bipedalism also exists in other Homo species. So we have to eventually get to Homo sapiens, all right? At the level of the species. That is going to be through the cultural aspect. And so I'm gonna stop here for a few minutes. Let's see, 11:20. All right, so we come back 11:30. All right, let me pause the recording in here. Okay, folks, welcome back. We're going to go now into the material aspect. Before leaving the bipedal, I want to point out at a transition species that was discovered in the 70s in what is known as the Great Rift Valley in Africa. It's a huge area. Many discoveries have been made there. This is Equatorial Africa. And it's the region between two plates. For example, you can see here. Here's Africa, and this is the Great Rift Valley here between the Somalia plate and the African plate, tectonic plates. Remember, we talked about tectonic plates, and there's some uplifting there and rubbing that has made this area, it's called the Great Rift Valley. And a significant number of fossils, of human fossils have been found there of hominids, okay? Including one that is a southern fossil, it's Astralopithecus, and she goes by the popular name of Lucy. Several specimens have been found, okay, fragments of the fossil. This is a reconstruction. Let's see if I can make this a little smaller. For example, these are the bones that have been found and reconstructed, but since this discovery in the 70s, more representatives, more individuals have been found, and sometimes even with children with small skeletons of infantiles or juveniles, and they were walking side by side. And one that was very significant was the footprints of Lucy on the mud, which went on for quite a distance. Okay, these footprints are very famous now. You can see there's a large footprint here of the adult, and then there's a smaller one of a juvenile walking together, not knowing whether we're holding hands or not, but this has been interpreted as the mother and the child walking together, definitely bipedal for a long stretch. Then more of these prints have been found over the years, to where there has been a reconstruction of the whole family of these Astralopithecines. They're called Astralopithecus Afarensis. All right. And I just wanted to show you, it's a little film here. It's only a couple of minutes, but it compares this fossil is affectionately known as Lucy, and a lot of work has been done on it because it was a significant discovery. And this could be very well a transition species between the southern apes and the Homo, well, she's Homo in the tribe of hominin, and the human, the Homo line as such in the genus. But there was a little film that showed these, compared these three. In other words, how Lucy would walk compared to how a chimp walks and a human walks. So it's only a couple of minutes. Let me run this for a moment. And you see here, first, here's a skeleton of a modern day chimp. Here is Lucy, the reconstruction of the skeleton. You can see she's bipedal, she's erect. and a little larger than the chimp, but when the chimp stands up, as you'll see on this little video, they're about the same size, more or less, about 3 feet. And then it's going to show a human skeleton walking, which is about twice the size, almost twice. But she is already bipedal, fully bipedal. So let me shift here to optimize for video and then maximize this. Here we go. It's only a couple minutes. There's no sound, but you can follow the little captions. So he's pointing out what they share in common. And now the chimp has gone erect in the knuckle walking. See how they swing the arms back and forth. But there's a problem of that displacement. So eventually the chimp has to go down on 4 legs again. Now it's going to compare Lucy with a modern human. As you can see, almost twice as tall. So she's similar to a pygmy, but the brain size is also smaller, only about half the brain size, less than half of the human, but fully bipedal, as you can see. So the hip is already displaced and the feet have already adapted to walking totally with the articulation of the toes. And that's going to show all 3 together walking. Starting from the beginning, the chimp knuckle walking, and the characteristics that they share in common, the protruded jaw and so forth, but then the neck in common with the human, shoulder blade in common with the chimp, arms in common with the chimp. Now the chimp goes upright, erect. All 3 are walking by the typical bowed walk. It's called a bowed walk of the chimp, where the legs extend outward somewhat, and then having to go down on 4 again. Okay, see if I can get out of here. So that is a nice transition there on the bipedalism with this species of Australopithecines, which are in this area of the Great Rift Valley, which includes Lake Victoria and going into what is modern Somalia and Ethiopia. That region there is very rich and relatively rich in fossils of humans and the genus Homo. So we're still at the level of the genus. We're going to look at some of the cultural evidence for the transition to Homo. And one of the first is tool making. So not just using tools, as I showed the chimp holding a rock, for example, for defense as a weapon, or to crack something open as a tool, but actual tool making. And it happens with these flints that are made from other stones, typically to cut and to tear to get a sharp edge on a rock, all right? And these are called clovis. Basically, these edges are made with another rock. So it is very primitive, but it is a step forward in using one rock to make essentially a knife to cut, right, with another rock. So to make these clovis, as you see, the edges are shown, they're sharp. They were made with other rocks, so that's the beginning of making a tool, which happened around 2.5 million years ago. And it coincides with that transition, right, between 3 and 2 million years of the branching off between the Panini and the Homini, because before then, we just had common ancestors. I'm talking about, no, this one. I'm talking about this transition here. The Australopithecines continue down here, and the Homo, species Homo, continues up here. About 2.5 million years ago, the development of making tools. Now, the other evidence is harnessing fire, which so far, the oldest evidence we have is about 1 million years ago. Again, some other cave, some other cavern could be discovered anytime that could push this date back, right? But at least as far back as about 1 million years ago, we have evidence essentially of a campfire. And it's a campfire because in contrast to a wildfire, for a couple of characteristics. Number one, that, well, first of all, it's inside a cave, so it's harder to get a wildfire inside a cave. But beyond that is the intensity of the fire and the fact that there was actually some burnt bone in that campfire. This is a cave that, again, is in South Africa. It's called the Wonderwork Cave. And there is this evidence of a campfire, essentially, that was made in there, and it has bone that is burnt. In other words, some piece of bone, some piece of animal was put on the fire, on the campfire to cook it, all right? And maybe at first it fell by accident, and they realized, the primitive hominids who were eating this realized that it may have been a little more tasty, like a barbecue tasty, but it had also a digestive advantage. All right, cooked food has a digestive advantage, which of course these primitive people did not realize this because they just didn't have the level of sophistication of chemistry that we have, or even understanding the digestive system and the digestive process. But what it does physiologically, when we cook food, it starts the digestion process. It starts breaking down the molecules, okay? It starts breaking down the macromolecules, the lipids, the proteins, the carbohydrates, starts breaking them down into smaller sizes that could eventually be absorbed as nutrients in the small intestine. Okay, so it actually helps the stomach do its thing, all right, the digestive process. So that's what cooking does. And of course, we have very sophisticated cooking today to the point that we don't even need to use fire because what we need of the fire is the heat. And now we can get that heat with a microwave, for example, or convection oven and so forth, where there is no active fire going on. Even in electrical range, there is no real active fire going on, but we get the equivalent or the product, which is the actual intense heat that starts breaking down the molecules. So that happened with this campfire, and it kind of stuck. You know, the meat tasted better, and maybe they realized they could digest a little better. I don't know about that other part, but certainly it must have tasted better to them, easier to eat. And so they stuck with the concept of the wildfire, of the campfire. In addition to that, they found other advantages of that, of harnessing the fire into a campfire situation, all right? They found that it gave them light, so it extended the daylight artificially for them. Even after sunset, they could still do some stuff around the campfire because they could see from the light of the wildfire, of the campfire being harnessed. Also, it gave them warmth, especially as they went into the winter and out of Africa, not so much in Africa because it's fairly warm there, but maybe in the middle of the night, it was a little cooler, so it gave them warmth. And certainly in a cave situation, even in the tropical regions, caves tend to be cool or cold. All right, so it allowed them to inhabit a cave by maintaining these campfires inside. Of course, it also killed them eventually by the accumulation of carbon dioxide and monoxide, but it offered also defense. They realized that other animals were definitely afraid of fire and they would stay away. So it has at least these 4 advantages that are distinct advantages of harnessing fire. All right, so that's another thing that we see. And the furthest back we can trace it, again, is in this cave, which is about 1 million years ago. Okay? Moving forward, we see that there are other human cultural traits that begin to emerge within this last million years. Again, from what is known as the material evidence. In other words, what is left behind in the caves that were inhabited and so forth, and eventually even some buildings that they made primitively by stacking rocks and stones on top of each other. We see art developing. All right, now here we are within the million years in the hundreds of thousands, but we see art developing, especially, for example, Altamira, the cave in the cave region of northern Spain that is very interesting. There is actually a movie made on Altamira, very, very interesting. I recommend watching the movie. It's not that long. These are those famous paintings of these bisons and other animals, deer-like animals, certainly mammals of Europe at the time. Then there are these prints of hands also. The colors are typically ochre and black, but also a mud-like color. These look a little bit like maybe lions, mountain lions and so forth, carnivores, top carnivores. These are definitely herbivores. I had been to this site with my parents and my brother many years ago in the 60s, where we could actually go into the real cave. Today that's banned, and they have made a reproduction of the cave in this is the entrance to it back from the 1960s. And then a couple of years ago, my brother and I went back to the site, and now it's a huge museum there. And they have made a reproduction of the cave from the inside. And even that is by appointment. One has to get an appointment to go into the reproduction of the cave. But it's very interesting. It's pristine. It's a World Heritage Site of the United Nations and so forth in northern Spain. So there are these caves throughout Europe that have very primitive art that dates back to hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands of years ago. All right, so we're in the thousands range. It's part of the culture. We see no other animal making art, okay? And it's still very much a speculation to what purpose the art. Did it have a religious purpose? Did it have a social bonding aspect? Did it have some kind of aspect of magic or trying to possess the animal that they were going to hunt eventually, something like that? Another aspect of the human culture, of material culture, in other words, stuff that primitive humans left behind, right? Primitive humans' material culture is burying the dead. Why would they bury the dead? Okay, there is no hint of any burial of dead in any other animal. Developing clothing. Again, no other animal wears clothing, even though they live in environments that could use clothing, especially cold regions and so forth. And then eventually the development of religion, which again starts with a mixture with superstition and magic and so forth, but eventually consolidates into a major institution. And we see that any culture of the world that has been studied by anthropologists, they have some kind of religion. There may not be a Judeo-Christian religion, but they have some kind of practice of spiritual beliefs, okay? Including ritual, which again, we don't see animals. Animals do engage in ritual, but typically the rituals that they engage in are for reproduction, are mating rituals. Aside from engaging in mating rituals, which we do engage, like for example, dancing, we also engage in other rituals that are not for reproduction, and that's pretty much what we call the practice of religion. So here are some examples of burying the dead. The oldest ones that have been found are in Israel, in a site that is called Quafes, Confess, I don't know how to pronounce this, Confess. It's about 100,000 years ago. And this is the oldest known burial site. And it's two skeletons, an adult skeleton and an infantile skeleton, juvenile skeleton, human. And they can tell this is the mother, this is at least a woman because of the pelvis that is fairly well preserved, and it tends to be, the pelvis on the female skeleton is more roundish than the male, allowing for the passage of the head, the birth canal for giving birth. And so it's speculated that this was a mother and a child who were buried together. And they're in this cave. Then also Neanderthal. I find this very significant because at some point we have to posit the possibility of these people having a soul, right? If we're going to consider them fully human, they had a soul, which would be an immortal soul. And when would God grant a soul to these hominids, all right? At what stage? Well, we find that there is at least one burial site has been discovered for Neanderthal. It dates to about 5,000 years, 50,000 years ago, KYA, 1,000 years ago, all right? And it's in France, in another cave. And there's also some, I think, some small artifacts that may have been found also with the burial sites, some pieces of pottery and things like that, maybe some clothing. So that's why it's considered to be a burial and not just someone who died along the trail and then just became fossilized. No, this is actually inside a cave. It's an actual burial, right? Again, we don't see that in any other animal other than this, this genus of the Homo, the homini. All right, let's look a little bit at geography. What is not disputed is that the Homo genus, of which we belong, we're the only representative species of the genus right now, but the Homo genus started in Africa. That is definitely not disputed, right? So the biblical Eden or paradise, the original paradise in biblical terms would have been in Africa, excuse me, in Equatorial Africa, most likely around the Great Rift Valley, this region here, back then. Okay, very lush, very abundant, with lots of vegetation and fresh water available. What is disputed is how far back did we migrate out of our ancestors migrated out of Africa, and how many waves came out of Africa and so forth, all right? And when did that happen? When did the first migration of Homos came out of Africa? Estimated to be anywhere between 1 million to 200,000 years ago is the range. And then also disputed if it was one or several waves that came out of Africa of the genus Homo. So here's a little bit of the, also from Barton, the dispersal pattern. It was on along the coast. So if the genus Homo started here, this is Lake Victoria and Turkana, and this is the Great Rift Valley region here, Ethiopia, and that here, the Horn of Africa. So it was along the coast. Again, the coast being the most fertile ground for dispersal and easy food to be available. So the coast then, if it starts here, the dispersal would be going south. When you get to the coast, you have to make a decision. You either go to the left or to the right on the coast, right? Well, they did both. They went south all the way down to Cape Horn down here at the bottom of Africa. Or they went north and eventually around the Arabian Peninsula out into the Indian subcontinent. Now, of course, the Himalayas are here, but if they stay along the coast and hug the coastline, it has several advantages. Number one, you avoid the drastic cold of having to climb across the Himalayas Number two, you always have food available to some extent, especially because of the coastline generally is more abundant food sources available. And keep in mind that this is more or less around the equator region, the equatorial region or sub-equator. And therefore it's going to be tropical or subtropical, nice, warm, and abundance of animals and plants along that way, okay? Also notice that this is showing the brown contour here is the current land, the current coast, but it's showing here is the primitive coast that goes back about 65,000 years ago, all right? 65,000 years ago, the coastline, all of this Southeast Asia was all connected by a landmass. Today, like here is Vietnam, for example, all right, Singapore and so forth. But Malaysia, back then, it was all one big, huge peninsula, one landmass. And so they didn't have to employ rafts or anything like that. They could actually literally walk the coast, getting very close to Australia, which we see at that time, 65,000 years ago, Australia and New Guinea were also connected. So maybe they could have done some island hopping here to get across into Australia, okay? The point is that back then, all these land masses were connected, what are today islands or peninsulas, because again, the ocean was a lower level. And so we have had these shifts of rising and lowering of the ocean, depending on the different glacial and interglacial periods. Give me a minute here. There's a text from. Okay, sorry, Jordan had a glitch with his computer, but it's being recorded. Not to worry, Jordan, it's being recorded. Okay. All right, so these are possible dispersion routes all along the coast. And there is material culture to follow that, to give evidence that the primitive Homo genus moved along this way, all right? Colonizing eventually all of Equatorial Asia and even down into Southeast Asia and possibly Australian continent. All right, so there are two main theories of dispersal. Either it was a single wave out of Africa or that it was multi-regional. There's another theory that's less popular, that it went also north here and went directly into the Middle East and eventually into Europe. Because again, in the interglacial periods there, that was more connected, and still there's a strait of buffers there between what is today Turkey and Greece, which is very narrow and relatively easy to cross. So that could have been a multi-wave going, once they get to the Arabian Peninsula, go both north and south, colonizing both Europe and Southeast Asia. Kind of simultaneously, but two divergent waves of the genus Homo. Okay, so that would be this one, the multi-regional. Whereas a single wave talks about exactly that it moved this way, and then eventually all of these coastal hominids started migrating north into the land terrain and eventually populating Asia and Europe. But Europe would have been, in this other pattern, Europe would have been the last one to be populated because they'd have to go around through what is known as Eurasia, this region here. And in the winter, it starts getting cold out there, okay? More temperate, also pointing to the need for a selective pressure in favor of clothing. Okay, this is another pattern that is showing both routes here. Basically, the Arabic Peninsula would have become a focal point of dispersal, either going north or east or south. And then at some point, those different bands of tribes of people converging at some points. What is not shown here, so this is mostly showing large dispersal movements, but it's not showing much the mountain ranges that would put constraints on these movements. Then this one is a very famous one that is the Bering Straits crossing. Again, is considered to have occurred through the last ice age between 10 to 20,000 years ago into the North American continent. So basically the North American continent being uninhabited by Homo species before 20,000 years ago, at least the evidence that we have so far. And then there was that land bridge that formed. It was actually an ice bridge connecting the Bering Straits from what is today Alaska to, this is all Russia up here, Siberia. And that ice sheet solid, talking about 1 to 2 miles of ice, okay, on top of the surface, solid walking across, possibly following herds of mammoth, herds of reindeer and so forth that were coming from Siberia across to the northern continent for hunting, because certainly no plants up there during that ice age, right? Or very, very few scant little patches. And spilling into North America and then down the coast. This arrow maybe, well, this arrow is showing the migration toward the south on the east of the Rockies, but there's another hypothesis that they actually went along the coast, which would put them west of the Rockies, the Rocky Mountain Range, down through the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico into the Tapón de Darién in Panama and crossing into South America. And then the Andes, not really shown here, but it's speculated that it went continue along the coastline all the way down into South America, Tierra del Fuego, at the very tip of Chile, the southern tip of Chile. But also this branching, so a bifurcation on the road here, getting to the Andes, either east or west of the Andes, and the eastern branch would go into the Amazon basin and populate that all the way to the tribes that we have there today, Yanomami and all the other native South Americans. So various dispersal routes, and every one of these routes leaves behind, what do they leave behind? They leave behind material culture. They leave behind campfires, abandoned, some clothing, beads, some tools that were left behind, okay? And that's what has been studied, burial sites that were left behind and some of these material culture. Okay, coming to the end here, just a little review. What we're talking about is that these human cultural traits, the paintings that were left behind, the burial sites, some clothing, tools, the making of tools here, harnessing fire. Two things that would have to be put here is harnessing fire. One S or two S, harnessing. I think he wants the 2S. And what else did I say? Harnessing fire. Clothing. Oh yeah, making tools that make tools. Okay. These are unique to the human at the level of the genus Homo. Whether they are now, the question is, of these Homo, of the 6 representatives that we have, how many of them or how far back would we actually posit a soul? All right. In other words, of these 6 species, which of them actually are in heaven or hell? Okay, so you see, I introduced this in these terms because now we can also look at ethics. Which of these species actually practice ethics and had what we could call ethical or unethical behavior, which would be some hint that there was a conscience, that there was a moral, ethical conscience, because no other animal practices ethics, okay? When a tiger takes down a water buffalo in India, you know, they don't ask forgiveness or go to confession for taking down that water buffalo. They just proceed to eat it. So that's instinct, all right? So at one point, and we have instinct. We have to recognize that we, Homo sapiens sapiens, we also have instinct. So we're attracted to food, we're attracted to the opposite sex and so forth. So we have instinct, but we can control that instinct, whereas other animals can't. An animal, when they see food, they go for it, okay? We can hold back, pay for it first, whatever. Save it for later when we're more hungry, etc. So ethical behavior is pointing toward a conscience. And so we can ask the question, from what they left behind from the material culture, which of these 6 species exhibited some kind of ethical behavior where we could say possibly they had a soul, you know, and therefore we're going to see them in eternal life if we get there in a good way. So all this to say that we can introduce now the philosophical and theological arguments for our belief in the human species, and the fact, the theological and philosophical fact, or belief rather, that God created us in his image. And like Genesis 1 says, the first book of the Bible, the first chapter of the book of Genesis, God made us in his image and likeness, okay? And these 2 first primitive humans that God created, they have names, Adam and Eve, all right? So who of these hominids were Adam and Eve? And so I'm going to leave this as a little bit of homework. I want you to look up these 2 words, okay? So Adam and Eve are the nouns here. They are the substantive, okay? But they are prefaced by these adjectives, mitochondrial Eve, and Y chromosome Adam, okay? Now, I want you to look it up and read up a little bit on it, because this is what I'm going to pick up next Saturday as I introduce the biblical narrative of the creation of the human species, which, like I say, it's a Judeo-Christian tradition, right? Because we share essentially the Old Testament, and especially, very especially, the first 5 books of the Bible, what we know as the Pentateuch, and the Jewish people, they know it as the Torah, which is their sacred books, all right? So Judeo-Christian tradition. A little hint here is that the mitochondria is an organelle inside the cell, in the cytoplasm of the cell. You know that it is the energy factory of the cell, okay? Produces, recharges the ATPs of our body, the adenosine triphosphate, which is what we use for energy, the energy supply for metabolic reactions, metabolism. And because the mitochondria are within the cytoplasm of the cell, it is essentially we inherit our mitochondria at the zygote level. We inherit it from the egg, from our mother's egg, okay? So whereas from the father, we get the sperm, which has very little mitochondria, and even that male mitochondria is actually what little gets to be poured into the egg is killed, is destroyed by the cytoplasm of the egg. So we essentially inherit our mitochondria from our mothers. And we can do a maternal tracing, because mitochondria also have their own little specific DNA, you see? And so we can do a maternal lineage of our mitochondria going back many, many, many generations. On the male side, what do we have equivalent on the male side that is unique at the genetic level, at the genome level? Well, we have the Y chromosome, which only occurs in males. So we can trace, at least only on the men, we can trace the mitochondria, we can trace the Y chromosome through our fathers, their fathers, and so forth on the paternal line. But this can only be done on men because we're the only ones who have the Y chromosome. So the mitochondria can be traced both on men and women because we men also have mitochondria, right? And they came from our mother. In other words, they came from our egg, from her egg. Whereas the Y chromosome only happens on males, on men, but we can trace that on the paternal line because our Y chromosome came from our father. And his Y chromosome came from his father and so forth. And there's definitely a genetic sequence there, okay? So that's the preamble. Then look it up, read up on it. And we have kind of a scientific equivalent for Adam and Eve, and they're called mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. But they're not exactly the same. I'm going to be pointing out similarities and differences in the next lecture, which is kind of a pivotal lecture to look at the biblical evidence for the creation of the human species. Okay, folks, so basically that's what I have for you today. I don't know if you have any questions or comments, any texts that have come in since, nothing. Any chats, I don't see any here. Okay, so here we go. We're going to make that transition for next Saturday, and this will be very helpful to read up on these two concepts, all right? Because there's already scientific evidence there, tangible empirical evidence that we can look at. All right, if there's nothing else then, thanks a lot for your attention. I'm going to close now the recording and then move it forward with the email, as I always do. Okay, folks, thanks again.